We're speaking with Alan Lurie this morning, author of 5 Minutes on Mondays. Now, Alan, you talked about people enjoying their work or being good at something and not necessarily enjoying it, and I would like you to just touch on, before we ever hit the economic crisis, people were really struggling for many, many years about doing work that just to pay the bills. And it wasn't necessarily work that was meaningful for them. And, it seemed like it was rapid. I mean, how did we get there as a society? How did we get to the point where work only mattered because of the paycheck?
Right. Well, I'm not sure how I'm not a sociologist in that way. I think certainly my father's generation. If you went to my father, who's still alive, thank God, and is well, and has been retired in Florida for many years as an executive at Kodak. If you asked him, do you think you should enjoy your job? Do you think you should have fun? Do you think it should be meaningful? I think he would have looked at me like, what are you talking about? This is a job to pay the bills so I can take care of you and send you to college and pay for a house. And I think I know people looked for those things elsewhere. My generation, the baby boomers, really saw that. The Man in the Gray Flannel Suit, Death of the Salesman. There were a lot of, if you saw Revolutionary Road, which came out recently, there was a sense in the 50s that this was leading nowhere. People were depressed, men were angry, they were burned out, wives were taking Valium, the kids were a mess. It's not a good way to live when you're spending 40 hours a week or more. Americans are spending 50 hours a week at your job, and you hate it, and you're only doing it for a paycheck. You can't go on that way. Eventually it's going to take its toll on you.
And so, some of this, and excuse me for interrupting, but some of this, I think, I don't know which came first, but certainly the separation of the spiritual self and the work self occurred at a pretty big rate during all of this. And so, you've challenged that, and you do that with your book, 5 Minutes on Mondays. You've challenged that, we shouldn't be living these separate lives. So tell us a little bit about how 5 Minutes on Mondays came about.
Well, and that's a great segue because this kind of ties into it. And it's a funny story, and I'll tell it very quickly. But I met my boss, David Arena, who's the president of our company, on the train heading into Manhattan. And I saw him one day sitting across from me. I recognized him. He's a very well-known kind of business person in New York City. And it happened to be a very, very hot day that day, and I ran for the train, and I was sweating. And I thought, I'll introduce myself. And I pulled out a business card that was kind of soggy, and I gave it to him, and he looked up at me and said, thank you very much, went back to his meeting. And I saw him again about 6 months later, and he noticed I was reading a book in Hebrew heading home. And he sat down next to me and asked me what it was, and was very interested. He said, are you a religious man? And I said, well, I happen to be a rabbi. And we got into this wonderful conversation, and he's a person who's completely dedicated to spirituality and has reached some of the highest ranks, within the business world, acting in a way that's aligned with those values. And I was actually drinking a beer that day. It was Friday. I was heading home for the weekend, getting ready for the Sabbath, and I was having a little beer. And as I shook his hand, I spilled beer all over him, and I and he's, and he laughed. He said, "Well, now I've been baptized by a rabbi." and I saw him again about 2 weeks later. It was a day I took off from work. I was just moving, and I ran into the city to visit a client, and I was wearing jeans and a T-shirt, and I think I had paint on my pants because I was painting. And he walks in, I see him again, and I look like I don't look exactly professional. We got to know each other, and he liked that kind of awkwardness about me, if I could say so, or that he thought that was very authentic. I wasn't trying to impress him; I was just who I was, and he liked that. He made me an offer to come on board as managing director, and he said, I have an idea. He says our staff meets every Monday morning at 8 a.m. About 100 hard-nosed New York real estate brokers, if you can kind of picture these guys. He said, I'd like to start the staff meeting with you doing a little talk to us. Not a sermon, not religious per se, but talk to us about things like balance and honesty and authenticity and humility and gratitude. And so I said, really? And so for 5 minutes every Monday morning, I would get up in front of this group and I would share some thoughts, usually based on a recent personal incident or an incident in the news, and take that as a way to explore some of these concepts. And these talks would draw from a variety of different sources, different religious sources. I'm as likely to quote Plato and Buddha as I am Moses, and I'll quote Warren Bennis. And we eventually compiled, and I wrote them down. We'd send them out to our staff and to our colleagues and our friends. And soon they were reaching thousands of people in New York. And as a matter of fact, one day I was asked to be an expert witness to testify in a trial. And I swore myself in, what's your name? And I said my name. And the judge said, really, I love your book. She said, I love you. So she's been getting my writing. She said, I love what you write every week. And so it was reaching thousands of people. And then we decided as a company to compile them into a book to give away as a New Year's gift in 2008. That got into the hands of my dear friend Martin Roots, who was in Santa Fe and wrote Chicken Soup for the Soul and is just a dear, dear man. He sent it off to Pearson, and the publishers there loved it. And we did an extended version with some more content, which is now coming out as 5 Minutes on Monday.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
And so how would you recommend that people use this book?
Well, the book can be used in several different ways. Some of the chapters offer some very specific examples of things that you can actually do. There's a chapter on overcoming fear that has a list of very specific activities that one can do to do that. And the same thing for a chapter on authenticity. How can you really do that? Other chapters are more meditative, if you will. They're more speculative. I have a chapter on gratitude that really kind of challenges our whole idea of gratitude. Is it just something that we're happy that we got what we wanted? Or can we actually be grateful for the things that showed up in our lives that we didn't want at all, but that led us to change? The story that I really like, and this is, forgive me in advance if it sounds a little patting myself on the back, but my very first interview for the book was from CIO Magazine. And the person called me and she said, I've got to tell you, Alan, she said, I woke up this morning with a terrible headache. And I hadn't read your book yet, and I wasn't looking forward to it. And as I'm driving to work on the train, I opened the book, and she said after 3 chapters, my headache was gone. She said there's a style of the book, there's a content to it that's very relaxing, very comforting, very reassuring to people. And I've heard this a lot. And I think one way to read the book is simply to know that the things that are, because most of the chapters, or many of them, start with a very difficult or challenging or seemingly irreconcilable situation that happened at work or in my life. And then I go from there to really show how that can be a great opportunity for growth and a great opportunity for new adventures for you.
Well, and it sounds like that this is something that we need now more than ever. And the book is 5 Minutes on Mondays, and the author is Alan Lurie, who we've been speaking to this morning. Alan, it's been a privilege to have you here today. So tell us, how can people contact you if they want to know more about your book and the work you do?
Sure, and it's been a lot of fun, Cheryl. I've really enjoyed this quite a lot. The website for the book is going to be up in a couple of weeks, and if somebody wants to go to it, I don't know the exact address yet, but if you Google 5 Minutes on Mondays, I'm sure you'll get to it. I can also be reached via my email at work, which is Alan, ALAN, .Lurie, LURIE, at Grubb, GRUBB, -Ellis, ELLIS.com. The book should be available in the bookstores mid-March.
Great.
It'll be face out in all the Hudsons in the airport, so that's
Oh, fantastic. Alan Lurie, thank you so much. 5 Minutes on Mondays is something that I think everybody can afford to take.
Well, thank you.
Remember, everyone, think big. The world could be a better place because of a conversation that matters. This is Cheryl Esposito.